This takes, your brain isn't these colors. This takes the name, these lobes of the brain take the name of the bone that covers them. Frontal bones here, this is the frontal lobe. Parietal bones are here, these are the parietal lobe. Occipital is back here, this is the occipital lobe. And the temporal bone is here, this is the temporal lobe. Each one of these that are raised up that I can feel, those are gyri, G-Y-R-I. And the creases are sulcus. But we do have a deep, and that's called the longitudinal fissure. Fissures are deep. We have one that if I put my hand here, see how I'm almost touching this one right here? And that's the central sulcus. Goes across. Remember that coronal suture we had? It lies right there about where the central sulcus is. We have the frontal lobe. You want to know what the frontal lobe does? Rent the movie One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest. Old movie, but it's excellent to tell you what the frontal lobe does. They have these criminally insane that are yelling and screaming and killing people. They take them, and what they do is they cut out the frontal lobe. And now they walk around like zombies. They don't get excited because they don't have emotions. They don't make sudden changes. They don't make sudden decisions. They just, kind of like now we don't do frontal lobotomies anymore. Now we just load you up with drugs. Better living through chemistry. You take this brain apart. This is the cerebrum. This is the cerebellum. And this is the brainstem. I have the pons, and I have the medulla oblongata.
Is that new?
This, yeah. I stole it. I mean, I borrowed it. Yeah, that.
I think you just.
Remember I told you we had spaces in the brain? See the space right here? This is the ventricle. Yeah. This is the ventricle. And between this ventricle and this ventricle is a membrane called the septum pellucidum. It's a real thin membrane. Here it's showing the septum pellucidum. This is full of cerebrospinal fluid. It goes down here. This is the first and second. We don't say first and second, we just say they're the lateral ventricles. Here is the third ventricle. And then it goes into that cerebral aqueduct and it comes down here to the third ventricle. And all of these are full of cerebrospinal fluid. When we put this together, if I look, this is the longitudinal fissure. This one that has all the wrinkles, this is the corpus callosum. This is the septum pellucidum. You see my swoosh right there? That's the fornix. This is the thalamus. Right there is the hypothalamus, and right there is the epithalamus. This, there's two of them here and two of them there. This is the corpora quadrigemina. This is the mammillary body. When I come over here, get in there. Here's my thalamus. There's my hypothalamus. There's the epithalamus. And right here, that's the pituitary gland hanging off of the hypothalamus. Remember we looked at the sella turcica? This sits right in it. But when I come in from the front, I hit the pituitary gland, and then I hit the mammillary body. If I come in from the back, I hit the epithalamus, I go down, and I hit the corpora quadrigemina. Again, this is the lateral ventricle. This is the third ventricle. The third ventricle is filled by the thalamus. And then this is the fourth ventricle. Okay? At any time, these little canals can get blocked. And when they do, remember the ependymal cells? What part of the neuroglia and the central nervous system that makes the cerebrospinal fluid? They're going to keep making cerebrospinal fluid. And all of a sudden, when a baby's born, we measure the circumference of its head. We measure it 3 times a day for as long as they're in the hospital. And if it's going to start swelling because that cerebral spinal fluid can't move, it does it relatively quickly. And then we say they have hydrocephalus, water on the brain. You can have a motorcycle accident with no helmet, and you can damage or pinch one of those, and as an adult, you can get hydrocephalus. Now you'll see little kids running around with a little circle here and a tube coming down their neck. What it's doing is it's draining that excess fluid and bringing it down here to the peritoneal cavity where it can get absorbed. And every once in a while it gets plugged up and it'll go like this. And what they're doing is pumping it to clear it.
Is that for life?
Yes, that's for life. If I let that just continue to grow, it'll put pressure on the brain because it has nowhere to go. And then that child can be severely mentally disabled. Look right here. I got a little circle right here, and a little circle right there, and a little circle right there. This is the anterior commissure. This is the intermediate, the massa intermedia, the intermediate commissure, and this is the posterior commissure. Commissures let signals go from one side to the other. This allows, the corpus callosum is a huge commissure, and it lets information go from one side of the brain to the other. There was one neurologist that had a lot of guts. There was a kid that was seizing almost every 2 or 3 minutes. It was just a constant seizure. And what they did is they had him on medication and they couldn't stop him. So a neurosurgeon finally said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to cut the corpus callosum. So he cut right between the corpus callosum that holds the 2 sides of the brain together, and he stopped seizing. Sometimes you'll have an injury, and it damages the corpus callosum. And what I do is I put a coin in each hand, and I tell you to tell me what coin it is. I might put a nickel, a dime, and a penny, a nickel and a quarter, and you have to tell me what it is. Well, if you have a disjunction of the corpus callosum, you know it's a coin, but the other side of the brain can't identify it. Okay? When we look here, see how this looks like a tree? A lot of times they paint it white. That's the arbor vitae, that's the tree of life. So on this brain, you need to know the lobes of the brain. You need to know the longitudinal fissure and the central sulcus. You need to know the corpus callosum, the fornix. Here on the epithalamus is the pineal gland. It gives you your circadian rhythm, your menstrual cycle, and wake and sleep. Here's the thalamus, here's the hypothalamus, and there's, you have to be able to identify the pituitary, the mammillary body, the corpora quadrigemina, the pons here that sticks out, and the medulla oblongata. And there'll probably be other parts, I just can't remember which ones I want you to know yet. I'm going to give you a handout that shows you all this. And you may have to identify it here on this brain, or you may have to identify it on the picture. Keep in mind, if I have a brain and I look at it and it looks like a gray mass like this, it's been treated. Normally I reach in and try to pick it up and that jello runs right between my fingers. We have to treat it to make it solid so you can touch it and move it. Okay? The other thing you've got to remember, you damage nerve cells in the central nervous system, they do not come back. And that's why you'll hear there's science teachers out there that says, don't smoke because you're damaging brain cells, they're not going to come back. Then they tell kids, don't drink alcohol. Alcohol damages brain cells. Don't smoke pot because it damages brain cells. Don't do speed because it damages brain cells. I told you, my son looked at me and says, Dad, the valedictorian and the salutatorian of our graduating class They're so high in the morning from pot, they don't even know they're at school. I said, yeah, that happens. But they'll pay for it later. I mean, what am I gonna say? Empirical data says, Dad, you're lying, Dad. So then I gave him the other spiel that says, son, it's still illegal. You don't want to go to jail for 4 years because you had an ounce of pot. If you're going to go for pot, make it big.